Hello, my world history students, and welcome to part 3 of this 4-part series on World War I and its end. These are notes 12.2c, and this is, of course, Mr. Marks. When we left off, the war was pretty much at a stalemate, and all that was needed was for some major event to really tip the tide into one side's favor or the other's. This is actually going to happen on the German side with the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. You see, what happened was in early March of 1917, a series of bread riots in St. Petersburg would start a long series of revolts that would eventually end up in a revolution that will overthrow the Russian monarchy. We'll talk about it more on a later presentation. This will lead to V.I. Lenin coming into power, and he's going to come to power promising the people that he will pull Russian troops out of the war. Thus, the treaty, and you can see a picture of that treaty, well, actually negotiations for the treaty, but the treaty will be signed in 1918, and in return for allowing the Germans and the Ottoman Empire more of the Russian landscape, you can see that the Black Sea, the area just north of that, will be which used to be under Ottoman control, will be given back to the Central Powers as a part of this deal. That's the area that's in pink on the map. In return for that, Russia will pull out of the war. What this does is it frees up the Eastern Front. Now, there will still be fighting over there, especially in the Balkans and in the Ottoman Empire with Lawrence of Arabia and the Arab revolt that's going on there. But for the most part, Germany is now free to pull almost all of its troops off the Eastern Front and send them in mass to the Western Front. This mass of troops will be enough to break the stalemate. The moment that this revolution started, even if the treaty hadn't been signed, it was known that Russia was probably going to pull out of the war. And so Britain and France started really appealing to the United States in order to enter the war, in order to kind of counteract this German surge, which was certain to happen. A few events are going to lead to the U.S. entering the war. Different events will be brought up, even if they happened earlier in the war. The first one is the sinking of the Lusitania. This happened actually pretty early in the war. This is May of 1915. A British U-boat sinks the British a German U-boat sinks the British passenger ship called the Lusitania. 1,200 passengers are killed as the U-boat usually it'll hit a vessel and the vessel will slowly sink down. The Lusitania explodes. And many of the passengers are killed, and the Lusitania sinks very quickly. Of those passengers, 128 of them were Americans. The Germans will claim, and they'll use the explosion as proof, that the British were trying to use passenger vessels in order to transport weapons as a kind of cover. The U.S. isn't going to hear anything of it, though. When U.S. lives are lost, anger, resentment, and hatred towards Germans are going to abound through the country. It won't be enough to push us into war, but it will definitely turn public sentiment more against the Germans and more in favor of the British. This is only going to intensify with the discovery of the Zimmermann note. In early of 1917, the British intercept this coded message, and you can see the actual message right here, from a German foreign minister named Arthur Zimmermann to his counterpart in Mexico. In this coded message, Zimmermann promises that in return for Mexican support of Germany, Germany would help Mexico to reconquer the lost territory of New Mexico, Texas, and Arizona. That's a pretty big thing. Mexico is, of course, not going to do this. They will not put its support against Germany and will, in fact, once this note is made more public, will give concessions to the United States to ensure its loyalty to, well, the Americas. But And Germany will, of course, say that this was just one of many different ambassadorial things which were passed back and forth. But this will really turn American sentiment against Germany because it looks like Germany was plotting to overthrow the U.S. government. What will snap the U.S., though, isn't going to be the Lusitania or the Zimmerman note. Those are the big things held in the press. It's that with the Lusitania, the Germans had promised to restrict their submarine warfare. They weren't supposed to attack ships without first making a visual confirmation. The only way for a submarine to do this was for it to surface, to check, to make sure that the boat that they were attacking was actually a military vessel, then to dive again. But that completely takes away the German submarines' advantage of surprise. If it came up and surfaced near a warship, that warship would start blowing it out of the water. And once the British had created convoys, they were able to use this more effectively. That made the Germans more desperate in order to try to stop this, in order to stop the British from receiving supplies. So they will take off their restriction on their submarines. And on March 30th of 1917, they will sink 3 U.S. ships within about a period of about 3 or 4 days. The U.S. will send a very harshly worded ultimatum, and when Germany says that it is forced to continue using its U-boats, the U.S. will enter the war on April 6th of 1917. Now, you notice this is actually before the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, so the German troops aren't going to be able to get to the front lines before the U.S. troops will start arriving there. Now, even though the U.S. enters the war on this date, it's going to take a little while in order to get the conscriptions through and to get U.S. troops across the ocean over there. It's now suddenly a race between the two. As they start to side up, they basically find themselves in a stalemate again. And Germany, in the summer of 1918, now that its troops are able to move away from the Eastern Front, makes one desperate attack, one final attack in order to try to end the stalemate in their favor. They go to the Battle of the Marne, and this is actually, there's a lot of pink in these areas. This is actually the smallest one, the bottom red square along that blue line that goes through the center of the map. The Germans knew that the French were worn out. They were in very weak condition. The U.S., though, with its fresh troops and with 4 divisions of British troops coming to their aid, were able to hold back the Germans and actually make it so the German casualties exceeded those of the Allies. That was the Central Powers' last real push. And from this point on, after this second Battle of the Marne, the Allies, which now includes the U.S. Army, are going to continue and win victory after victory, just pushing their way on their way towards Germany. It is obvious to everyone that the war for Germany is lost. So, in quick review, what event forces Russia to withdraw from World War I? And then, right along with that, what events brought the U.S. into World War I?